Good morning, everyone. This up a little bit. Okay, Branden Workman from SKF. I was a little surprised and taken back when I was approached to present here because, as Jim stated earlier, we're probably an in trouble company from where our progression's at right now. The compliance assessment's done. We understand our gaps, but are still diligently working to close those gaps. So this is not it's not going to be a true success story of where we're at now, but it's the journey that where we're going and how do we get there and how have we gotten there so far. From an SKF standpoint, if you are aware of us, more than likely it's from a bearing standpoint, which would be the upper left-hand corner, the aero bearings standpoint. But also do a lot of other work from a airframe standpoint, fixed wing and engine applications, electromagnetic solutions, sealing solutions, so a whole gambit of the aerospace community. And that's where a lot of the challenge comes in. This is not a one site, one product type implementation. It's across the board. It's systemic. It's how do we get everything, and all those different variables in place. From that standpoint, there's 6 sites in North America that this is impacting, 3 sites in Europe. So again, the challenge: how do we implement a square peg into a round hole type of solution, if you will, at different sites, different manufacturing competencies, different skill sets. Those 9 manufacturing sites, again, have those 5 distinct product types I referenced on the previous slide. But as any project this size, right, this is a large project. This goes back to the analogy of trying to eat an elephant, right? This is not something you're going to do in one bite. This is going to take time. Developing that project plan is paramount. How do you put that roadmap in place to develop it? And that's where a lot of the effort was initially, is developing what that project plan is. We use the 13,009 checklist as a starting point. Pretty quickly, we realized there's a lot of shortcomings in that. Again, very vague. Trying to use that to show compliance over an entire section when that section has 12 shalls is a little difficult. And when you're trying to apply that across 9 different sites, again, it complicates it all more. So again, we made some adjustments to it. We use that as a starting point. Again, use that as a point to start, and then we adapted to what works for us. And again, what worked for us is having a row for each specific requirement, having a row for each specific customer requirement, whether that's Pratt's ASQR1 or Rolls-Royce Sabre, etc. Again, having everything in one document to understand the interactions, and then columns for what internal document covers it, column for who owns it. And then the biggest thing for us was, is this going to be something that we implement across our entire QMS, or is this just to the ASQ community? In a perfect world, these are all requirements we built into our entire QMS, but there's a significant cost impact to that. And how do we justify that? So looking at that is this a standard requirement, or again, just specific to the AESQ community? And that was huge for us to finally make that realization. This is not something we can do across the board. When we looked at this after our initial evaluation, 428 applicable requirements. And for any of those of us who've tried to buy a home or get a car recently, that sticker shock, right? And that sticker shock of 428 was pretty monumental. And again, that was just a hurdle in itself, getting over that. But then again, thorough review, looked at our current QMS and realized that, there's many aspects that are already built in. As I'm sure all of you went through your own QMS and realized that, a lot of these requirements are something we've already in place, or we just have to tweak. Really helped get us off the ledge. But after we went through it, it wasn't necessarily the number of gaps that was alarming, it was the magnitude of some of the gaps. And that's really what our focus was, is realize where those large magnitude gaps were and focus on those. So that gets into, I'll say, our second step in developing that plan to get those large magnitude gaps in place and understand them. From our standpoint, it was typically areas outside of typical qualities control, right? It was the top management, supply chain, design, human resources. Other areas, again, their quality doesn't have a historical influence, if you will, or our influence is more secondary. But where we took it is we still took this as a quality assurance role. I mean, as probably most of you realize, this is still a QMS. So again, from a top management standpoint, this is viewed as a quality requirement. right? This isn't necessarily a BMS yet approach, and definitely with an SKF, it's still a very true QMS. So quality led this journey. We led it with each individual group. We led it with developing their roadmap with them, understanding, make sure they understood the requirements and overseeing that. Then the next is the prioritization. So from that standpoint, again, you have to understand, what the old high effort, and then the gain aspect of it. Look at each plan as from a value versus the amount of effort to achieve, and understanding that not everything is equal from that standpoint. And from our standpoint, we use that as the guide to create our compliance plan. And we really focused on that accelerate to change, and it's a buzzword within SKF, but how do we accelerate change within our organization? And that high value, low effort improvements are what's key to drive the project, right? Anytime you have a project this size, how do you show the evolution? How do you show the gain? Okay, and if you don't aren't able to show the positive aspect of it quickly within a change of this magnitude, it loses momentum. So again, those high value, low effort activities are key to start off with. And then the improvements evolved, and we went to the different areas, try to standardize the best we can. Again, over 9 different facilities, there's a lot of opportunities for standardization, but there's also a lot of pushback from that as well. So how do you juggle that? Utilize as much as possible the reference materials. Again, the 603 pages of information is extremely helpful, along with the different appendices that are up here. All those are good information, even if you don't use them, to at least to verify and understand what's there. They may help guide you even if you're not realizing it. But our last step from this standpoint of our 4-step approach, and get to the high effort, high value improvements. So again, if we got through the low effort, high value to show some traction, if you will, show some momentum, show some gain, and then get into the areas that are truly going to impact that zero defect approach, your CPKs, your MSAs, your FMEAs. Again, your proactive tools, okay? And that's really where the drive to the zero defect lies. Thankfully, from an SKF standpoint, we had a previous push on this prior to 13,100, so it wasn't something that was new to us, but it was still relatively new, and it really enforced the momentum behind it to increase. But then we had to focus on the part number specific actions as well. So again, this gets into the high effort, high value, or you may have had a process PFMEA on a different process type from us, where from a manufacturing standpoint, we're grinding, machining, heat treating, special processes, where we had a specific, a specific process FMEA. But then how do you break that down from a part number standpoint? How do you drive that, drive those efforts? And again, the efforts here are a marathon. They're not a sprint. So all these things take time, again, to break this down for something that you may have had a 50,000 foot level solution before, and breaking this down to a specific was very time consuming. And again, it's not something that you can look at and try to evaluate day by day if you're succeeding. It's more month over month. But I mean, this journey is not without struggle. Again, I mentioned we are not in a position where, those surveys, where I'm not ranking us as a compliant company. We still have a significant amount of work to do. From our struggles, the supply chain has probably been the biggest, getting that, cascading the requirements, cascading the acceptance, and really ensuring suppliers understand what their next steps are and what's at stake for them. Attempts to justify implementation costs versus return on investment, as we all probably live in a cost environment where every cost is scrutinized nowadays, especially more so than it has been probably the previous couple of years. This has been a very huge struggle for us. How do we input resources now to save resources later? And that's always difficult to try to quantify, and haven't been successful in every single case either. Develop different solutions for the same requirement across different sites. So again, this round peg, square hole, with 5 different product types. What works for one doesn't work for another. And that's part of again, make sure you don't just try to develop a one set solution and expect it to work across. If you have different sites or different processes, it won't. And then last but not least, the struggles, the intermittent demand and low quantity part numbers. I mean, there's some engine applications we have orders for less than 10 pieces per year. Okay. How do you justify the cost for if you need to make a change on one of those? And again, it really focuses you to refocus what is your core business competencies and what you really want to go forward with. It's really forced us to really think about that. What's our long-term play in a lot of these markets? Again, you're not alone. I know there's been a lot of things mentioned with the LinkedIn communities, the ASQ site. A lot of primes have periodic reviews on this, different colleagues. Again, the collaboration is key. No one's going to come up with some magic Rosetta Stone solution for implementation that's going to work for all. Steal with pride. Guys, take others who have done something that's worked and replicate it the best you can. That's the end of my presentation. Steve, you are up next.